to Clinical Trialblazers, a podcast by Biotech, where we dive deep into the journeys of the industry leaders shaping clinical research and biotech innovation. I am your host, Alberto Grignolo. My guest today is Dr. Allison Jeynes, Chief Executive Officer of Nefro Avillion Clinical Development, an organization that combines expertise, regulatory and clinical strategy, and hands-on clinical trial execution and delivery. Allison is a trained clinician with more than 30 years of senior leadership experience in the life sciences. Previously, Allison held medical director roles at Bristol Myers Squibb, Novartis, and Wyeth, as well as a consultant to AstraZeneca, Roche, Genentech, and Johnson & Johnson, among others. She was CEO of Avillion LLP for 12 years, bringing in every deal and building the business, resulting in a 100% success record across therapeutic areas. She has expertise in oncology, women's health, transplantation, respiratory, immunology, gastroenterology, anti-infectives, neuroscience, and vaccines. Commercially, Allison has significant experience with assessing potential in-licensing candidates, with reimbursement, and also with political lobbying, the latter more UK-focused. She has led the development and approval of around 20 drugs over her career. Today, as CEO of Nefro Avillion Clinical Development, formed in May 2025 with the teams from Avillion and ITB Med, a renal transplantation company, Allison's journey is a story of evolution, from physician leader to enterprise builder, navigating opportunities and challenges in one of the most demanding arenas in biotech. Allison, welcome to Clinical Trialblazers.
Thank you, Alberto. It's great to be here and really looking forward to the discussion today.
To start us off, would you please tell me the story and the creation of Nefro Avillion? I understand there's a degree of complexity in the story, so it would be good to just set the stage and tell us, what is the story?
Definitely. I guess every story has a few components, I would say, in terms of the creation of Nefro Avillion. It was really around the success record that you spoke about, so the sort of 10, 12 years of success within Avillion, as well as networking, which I guess always has a bearing in terms of our own journeys, and some luck. So really, to sum it up, as you said, Avillion had a 12-year success rate of bringing in assets, bringing in molecules from large pharma, where we would own that development, we would take the asset through a regulatory approval process and only get paid on success. So we were taking the full, if you like, binary risk. We started in oncology, which I obviously knew very well from my time in pharma, moved into immunology, and then we actually moved into respiratory with AstraZeneca just at the time of the COVID pandemic. And I guess based on a chance meeting actually with the CEO and founder of Royalty Pharma, who was actually one of our investors, one evening, as always, these things happen, 11 o'clock at night, you're just off an EasyJet flight. Who do you bump into in the corridor when you probably rather you didn't, when you just want to crash out? So I bumped into the CEO and founder of Royalty Pharma, and he said, exactly, you are the solution. I'm like, okay, coffee, a drink at the bar, what's happening, right? And he said, no, we need your team. We need you and the team to work across Nefro Health. And that's very much been the evolution of how we've come to be Nefro Avillion Clinical Development and how we now work across that ecosystem of Nefro Health working in renal transplantation.
So was it an opportunistic run in the hallway kind of encounter leading to a new idea?
That's exactly right. I think they had, at the moment, there's 5 or 6 portfolio companies all working together, trying to improve the outcomes for patients in renal transplant. But what they needed really was an organization with the track record around clinical development to really give them the highest chance of success. And the Avillion team, alongside the ITB Med transplant expertise, working in early assets, really putting those two organizations together was very synergistic.
What is your general approach to selecting and advancing programs? And more broadly, what explains your 100% success rate history?
Previously with Avillion, I actually personally did the due diligence, because you have to remember when Avillion came to be, that was before the evolution of AI. So actually diligence was literally myself reviewing clinical papers. And I remember actually before our first successful asset from Pfizer came on board, I think I'd reviewed 100 assets myself in terms of, scrolling through the data. Whereas now, of course, it's a lot easier to do that if we use the correct AI tools with the right signals. But we continue to be out there to be scouting for new opportunities, that we really believe that if you put the scientific acumen there, you put the right trial design and the right team to deliver, that you have a higher chance of success. Obviously, if you're taking something into phase 1, the chances of 100% success rate are obviously lower. But I think it's also about that team and execution, and it's about the quality of the data at the sites and how you oversee that as a sponsor. All those things have been seen to be absolutely critical in terms of success rate. And I'm always struck by many investors when they're looking at opportunities say, is it the horse or the jockey? Whereas now I think they kind of say it's both. We've seen, and I've seen across my 30 years in life sciences, great assets fail, either because of poor execution, the wrong study design. So here it's about making sure that the science is sound around it, but that you also have the strongest team that you can have, experience-wise and focused, to ensure you have quality data coming out the other end.
As you mentioned, you went through scrutinizing hundreds of opportunities and really coming down to the final selection. How do you get there? This must not be easy when you're facing hundreds of opportunities.
No, it's not. But I mean, generally, we do our own diligence, as I said, across the leadership team. It was very much in those early days when the company was, I think, around 4 of us, and I had a portfolio career. But so it was really about focusing initially on the clinical data. I mean, the study that we looked at first with bosutinib, actually in chronic myeloid leukemia, had failed its phase 3 with Pfizer. And I looked at the diligence around that. I looked about why it had failed. If we thought that if you used a different dose, if you used a different endpoint, and actually endpoints had evolved at that point, and really looked at how you would help patients stay on the drug. And we thought the oversight, the training of the sites, all of those things, if we worked it through, we absolutely thought would result in a positive study. That's indeed what we did have. And I think it was the fastest ever recruiting study globally at that time in chronic myeloid leukemia, which was a tough space at those days. I'd been involved with Gleevec development at Novartis, so it was a very natural transition for me, but actually it was an awful lot of work. And when you say, how do you get there, Alberto? I had 3 investor groups that I also had to convince. It's fine to convince yourself and your team, but obviously when you're going to investors asking for money and sizable money, and having to go to their investment committees, you need to be pretty sure of your facts and pretty sure that you're actually going to get a successful outcome before they part with their money, which is right.
Right. Allison, you've had a very impressive career trajectory from clinical medicines to leadership roles at major pharma companies like Novartis, BMS, and Wyeth. So what inspired you to transition from working within large corporations in pharma to co-founding your own company, Avillion?
I think I've always been quite entrepreneurial, enjoyed decision-making, accountability and autonomy. And I think as you get further up the chain, certainly in the time when I was there, there's less of that. At the time, certainly that I was in a pharma organization and was thinking of making the transition to the commercial side, I think MDs were very much pigeonholed. You were very much pigeonholed to say, no, you're a scientist, you're an MD, you need to stick here. And I found that path, therefore, difficult to navigate. And so, rather than say I give up, it's you always need to have a plan B and usually a plan probably C and D. And so at that time, I thought, okay, this isn't going to work for me. Let's see what else the world has to offer.
How did your experiences in big pharma shape your vision for Avillion? Again, due respect to big pharma, wonderful work for many decades, but you transitioned out of that and into smaller biotech. So what experiences in big pharma shaped your vision for Avillion?
I mean, I sort of almost describe it as the good, the bad, and the ugly, as I thought about this, Alberto. And I mean, the good stuff would be, and I moved from the NHS and moved into big pharma. And I'm really delighted that I did that, because I think the training, the support, the mentoring that you get in big pharma is phenomenal. I also think seeing across different areas of the business is a great opportunity, because, recognizing that when you're working in academia, when you're working in the NHS, the pharmaceutical industry, I mean, maybe it's less mysterious than when I joined it 30 years ago, when it was definitely moving to the dark side. I think that's really, a lot of my friends thought I was crazy. Nobody really understood the clinical development piece and the role that MDs can have in life cycle management. So I think for me, the good piece was the training that I got and exposure to different elements of the business. So I think for me, there was navigating what was great about it, but also recognizing that in a more streamlined organization, when decision making was much more focused, you could really achieve the world. There was an opportunity out there to grasp.
Did you have a belief at that time that you could impact more patients if you worked in industry and got a big drug approved that could benefit millions, distinct from working in the NHS where you can help individuals with their daily problems? Any feeling around that?
Yeah, I think that's true, Alberto, but being absolutely honest, I loved my time at the Marsden. I loved oncology, and I actually would have stayed within the NHS. But at the point that I wanted to have a career within oncology, there weren't enough oncology posts in the UK, particularly as a woman who wanted a family to go through the NHS. People were saying to me, do you realise you'll be a registrar in your 50s doing a 1 and 2 on call? And how will you get a job near your partner? So at that point, I kind of recognised that I didn't want to do the primary care physician route. I didn't want to be a GP. And I wanted to keep my science and my oncology focus. And that's why at that point I moved to Novartis to work with early oncology assets. And I think sometimes for doctors who leave the NHS, leave hospital medicine and go totally immerse themselves in pharma, we forget that what we're asking patients to go through. Patients are already suffering from a disease and we're asking them to have 4 cannulas, spend the night in hospital, have 5 blood tests. These things are not pleasant. So I think, that was really useful for me. So I think I'm really glad I kept the clinical piece. And absolutely, as you said, I mean, there's the good and the bad with what you said, because yes, you can positively impact more patients, but you also need to make sure you're 100% sure of all the work you sign off on, the protocol design, the toxicity of a drug, the preclinical data, because the reverse is also true. And so for me, I take the role incredibly seriously.
You made many important points here. One of them I'd like to pick up on, and that is the experience of patients in clinical trials. It's very easy for industry to sit down and write a protocol and put in lots of different tests and procedures and so on because they want to have the information with little regard perhaps to how will the patient participating in the clinical trial go through all of that and what personal inconveniences will be resulting from a beautifully designed protocol that is perhaps less practical than it should be and very sort of harmful or off-putting to a patient.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things that I did from the get-go, whether it's oncology or it's now in transplant, is have a lot of engagement with patient groups, a lot of engagement to say, does this resonate? Will this work? Look at feasibility, because as you say, there is absolutely no point having a protocol out there that either you can't recruit to or that patients actually drop off. And one of the really interesting things actually around certainly the oncology space where I started in my foundations is that actually, generally speaking, patients love being part of clinical trials in cancer care because of the regular interactions that they get. When I think it gives them someone to talk to, you're talking to a research nurse to say how you're feeling, and also maybe the slight security that actually if you're being scanned every 6 months or a year and the follow-up, that nothing is going to be missed. But what really struck me as just inspiring is still in phase 1 oncology, as you know, for ethical reasons, quite often you can only enroll in a phase 1 study if there's no standard of care for you. And so the patients who enroll in those studies often are literally doing it for the good of patients who follow them, and yet still patients enroll into those studies. And it really gives me hope in terms of mankind. When we're in the age we are today, when we see the news and we see what's going on in the world, I still find that sometimes people going through the toughest journeys can be the most inspiring.
Have you perhaps become a fan of simpler, more streamlined clinical trial protocols that answer important scientific questions and don't overwhelm the patient with procedures and tests and visits?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, during my lifetime, I've had the unfortunate pleasure of having been a patient myself a few times. And I think there is nothing that focuses the mind more than actually being there yourself. You do absolutely realize that sometimes, why are we collecting this data unless each point of that data is absolutely critical for influencing your endpoints, influencing patient pathway going forward. So I do believe the more streamlined process and protocol is exactly the way forward.
Were there specific challenges or gaps you observed in the pharma industry that motivated you to create a different kind of solution at Avillion and Nefro Avillion?
I think, Alberto, it's very much about more of that streamlined, accelerated decision-making process in terms of, there's a finite period of time before ideally you're getting a return on your investment if you look at even the investor scenario. And so anything that you can do to accelerate that pathway to approval for a drug, I think is obviously incredibly helpful, not just to patients, but also in terms of returns for investors, for pharma, etc. And I think the other maybe key lesson that I would say when I look at the large pharma model that I learned from is often big pharma choose CROs through procurement, and cost isn't always the only consideration, I would suggest. And so I think one of the benefits from Avillion was we were able to use vendors who actually had expertise either in the geographies, in the phase of development, in the therapeutic area. And all of those things clearly make a huge difference in terms of outcomes.
You mentioned earlier in our conversation that you've always had an entrepreneurial spirit. Well, you now have been an entrepreneur for a number of years. So moving from a corporate pharma environment to entrepreneurship sometimes requires a shift of mindset and leadership style. So what skills or lessons from your time in large organizations have been most valuable to you as an entrepreneur and in your role as a CEO in biotech?
I think it's more the people that inspire you. When I looked across my journey before I became an entrepreneur, I mean, there was, again, I think, the good and the bad. And my first boss at Wyeth, who actually took a real punt, actually, in terms of recruiting me. Because at that point, I was, medical director at Bristol Myers. In the UK, I had maybe 10 people report to me, and I went to a department of around 100. I was the youngest medical director in the UK, first woman on the board of Wyeth, and he absolutely took a huge chance in terms of, he obviously saw something. I think he saw the drive. What he said was, I just didn't want more of the same. So I said to the headhunter, bring me someone different. And I remember he said I'd only got a slot at 6 a.m. if he wanted to interview me at Heathrow. And so I think he thought, well, this woman's going to be different. And so very hardcore. So I think what I would say when I reflect on that journey of what I learned from him, it was great sense of leadership. He was supportive, but it also gave me the freedom to kind of see, when did I need the help? When did I need support? But really allowed me to take my own path. And I think that's really important, because I think even if we get things wrong, it's the journeys we all personally go on that are really important, versus someone saying, don't do that because that will go wrong. And the other vital lesson I think I learned was, if you want to succeed, you need to be smart out there. And those were some really important lessons as I've moved into a pretty hard-nosed arena in the investor and the VC world moving forward.
I gather that CEO that believed in you and took a chance on you did not micromanage you. And as a result, do you also not micromanage your people now?
That's exactly right. I don't micromanage my team, but they all know 24/7 I'm there for them. I'm supportive. We talk through solutions. I let them think through a problem. They come back and discuss it with me. I'm always there for advice. But as I say, micromanagement, I try to manage people how I like to be managed, but obviously would take the feedback. But I really doubt that someone in the sort of organization that I run would fit in well if they wanted to be micromanaged, put it that way.
Does the fact that you have been a clinician for a long time, particularly in oncology, has that made you more empathetic towards your employees and more sensitive to their feelings and situations and challenges they may be facing?
I think empathy is something that we all learn on our own personal journeys. It is quite humbling to be an oncologist. I remember in my early 20s doing pediatric oncology at the Marsden, and that's before I had a child myself. So I do think that does give you a degree, obviously, of empathy. You know, we all have our own family stories of seeing people we love with dementia or losing loved ones. And for me, it's about how people support us in the bad times. It's a bit like friendship. It's easy to be friends with people, you know, in the good times and go to their party, but it's the people that you would call in the middle of the night when something went wrong. And really, I do try and create that culture that really does allow people to feel supported within their role, within their job.
Going from promising biology to actual therapy for patients has a number of scientific and operational risks, as we all know, and certainly you know that from having worked in so many organizations. How do you de-risk what you do?
For me, it is really looking at everything through to the preclinical data, your design of your study, your powering of your study, the feasibility, the vendors you use, the oversight, and the quality data. All those things impact your probability of trial success. All of them do, that's clear. You know, we don't know what the card's going to look like until we turn the card. But all we can do, as is in life, is make sure that we try and check every box and we really hope to get the right outcome.
All right. Let's talk about money. As a physician turned CEO, you bring a unique perspective to drug development, but you also presumably had to learn the language of capital, internal rate of return, risk-adjusted returns, structured financing, and other terms that you already mentioned in the European context. So how did you actually turn from clinician to entrepreneur and somebody who had to raise money and spend money wisely?
Well, I think, as I've mentioned previously, I was always interested in the commercial and the business side anyway. So it wasn't totally new to me. And actually, I had a role within the ABPI, Association of British Pharmaceutical Industry, at a time of the OS report. And at that point, it was, how do we look at attracting more R&D into the UK? I think the same cycle is repeating itself as I see now, right?
Exactly.
But, back in that time, and I guess 15, 20 years ago now, it was thinking through, R&D tax credits. It was thinking through the patent box. And all of those things, if you like, were a start of thinking out of the box. This wasn't just about phase 1, phase 2 development and obviously reimbursement challenges. And then I think, obviously, when I brought in the first deal from Pfizer, I had to obviously present at investment committees with my investor groups. And from that, as I sort of mentioned, because the deals that we were doing created P&L relief for companies, I was having to read a lot of accounting books and understanding US GAAP accounting, etc. And I had a great mentor, the investor from Blackstone, sat alongside me, and really, with my own reading, with my own papers, I think wherever we are, it's good to be stretched. It's really good to learn new things. I mean, as we all know, I think when we get to the next chapter from when we are here, things like learning a language, a musical instrument, all of those are good in terms of keeping us alive. And for me, I'd always been interested in the accounting side of it. I don't know, I had a grandfather who worked in the Bank of England. Maybe that's why. Maybe I was just kind of always interested in that side of it. But I really loved getting to grips with how the deal flow would work, and very much look forward to creating something new in the industry, which is exactly what we did. Exactly.
Do you think investors or potential partners initially had maybe some reservations about your ability to lead a company, given that you had a medical background rather than a business background? And if that happened, how did you address that to alleviate their concerns, if any?
I mean, the story was that, as I say, it was really myself as chief medical officer who brought in the deals in terms of the money flow. My connection with Pfizer, so I actually brought bosutinib into the organization. And then actually it was the clinical discussion that got the money to follow, if you like, from our investment committees. And so, in fact, it was the investors who asked me to step up and become the CEO. But you're right. I mean, much as I believe at Wyeth, somebody took a punt on me and thought, I wonder if she'll make it. As I've always said to Orf at the time, you took a huge punt. And here again, I think the investors took a punt in terms of they gave me 24 hours to decide if I wanted to become the CEO. And actually, the investor at Blackstone, who again I've worked with now for nearly 20 years, he said he couldn't believe it when I said, I may need longer to think about this. Because I think, of course, it's meant to be the honour. And I was like, I really need to consider this. And because I did consider it, because I hadn't gone out there and raised money before, I didn't know I was going to have to raise additional sums within a 3-month window. And actually what I had to do was almost impossible in those first 6 months. Because we were an organisation of 4 people, we hadn't written a protocol, I had 50 million to raise, I had to brief a CRO, get a bid defence in and raise the team globally, find offices, start everything. And in fact, lots of the CROs wouldn't even come through to a bid defence because they said it was going to be impossible to deliver. And yet we ticked all those boxes. So for me, that 6 months was a huge learning curve. But you're right. Yes, they did absolutely take a risk on me. I'm delighted that they did.
I'm keen to learn about your experience and perhaps challenges as a female physician, medical director in the pharma industry, and now biotech CEOs. Sometimes I'm asked to mentor women in leadership, so I'm really curious about your feelings and experience in your various roles as a woman.
It is different. I mean, I was just struck. I was at an AGM in New York back in November. And again, I was just struck about how few women are still in the room, which is sad, actually. And you have to ask yourselves why. But it is different. I mean, I remember I've just mentioned I was the first woman on the board at Wyeth. That was certainly a new experience. I think the first board director who'd actually gone on maternity leave, and I did explain actually it would need cover. Everyone was a bit surprised, and I said, no, it will definitely need covering. So that was definitely new. And back to conversations, even before that, when I was quite new to the industry and kind of, speaking amongst colleagues and peers at a Christmas and finding everybody else had a salary or an inflation increase and I hadn't. And I went to speak to my boss at the time and he said, well, you've got a rich doctor partner, haven't you, with a big private practice, so you don't need an increase. I mean, those things were quite shocking. But, saying that, I don't think it is just within pharma, and I was reflecting on this. I even remember in my time at the NHS, it was different being a woman. At one point, I was very interested actually in doing obstetrics and gynecology when I was at Sheffield. I mean, I got a distinction in that. That was something that really interested me. And I remember going through an interview process and just saying, being told, well, you're female, how's that possibly going to work? So, there are many anecdotes on the journey. It is different. I always feel that you have to give 120%. If you're juggling being, a mother, a partner, you've got a busy job, you're traveling a lot. I think those things are really difficult. And I think for any of us, having it all is almost impossible. And I was incredibly lucky to have an amazing mother who supported me with my family. And I know that I wouldn't have been able to do that without that support. So I absolutely recognise that's, I think, critical. So for me, those things worked. But I do think it's tough out there. And actually, I think recently I read in the Sunday Times that female-led businesses generally are 20% more successful. And maybe it is the proposition that women really do give it 120%.
There are emerging reports that the proportion of women as board members across industries these days is on the decline in the current environment. Do you think that's the case in biopharma? And if so, what can be done about it?
I mean, from the boards I've seen, I'm not necessarily seeing that. But, statistics are statistics. I guess my own comment on it is that I think mixed boards are the best. Because I think if you look at how both genders stereotypically behave and you put those skill sets, those positive skill sets together, then I think it's very synergistic. I think it's sad to say if there are less board directors in terms of women across biotech, because that probably doesn't reflect what we're seeing in terms of women securing funding in UK biotech. Because I think I was reading Cambridge Innovation Centre, they do a review of how much funding women get in CEOs. And actually that's doubled 2024 to 2025. It's still only 15% of the pot, but it's gone from 8%, despite the market out there, which I would say is pretty averse in terms of raising funds at the moment. So that's a positive. And for me, where the money flows and where there's great science, often you get those senior roles. So I would very much hope that that isn't the case. But, you have to wonder why. Is it because companies are saying, we're only having men? Is it because women aren't putting themselves forward, I guess is the other question. And then we have to work through, why is that? Why are women not maybe putting themselves forward? So I suppose until we do the analysis, it's very difficult to say what the reason behind that is. I think one of my own conjectures would maybe be it's also around post-COVID, people are considering work-life balance. And if you've got a very, very busy job, do you want to take a board role as well? Because a board role for me is not attending the board meetings. It's all the support and the work that you do between those boards. So actually it's almost always more than what it says on the table.
Looking to future leaders and looking back at your own career and thinking about emerging biotech leaders who consider embarking on a similar path to yours, what do you know now that you wish you had known when you first became CEO?
It's relentless. It's 120% the whole of the time, 24/7. Maybe I didn't realize that. Maybe I was a little naive. But that's absolutely the case. I mean, you don't switch it off being a CEO. You don't go on a ski trip and say, I'm not CEO this week, or go to Antigua and lie on the beach. Wherever you are, Saturday shopping, it doesn't matter what you're doing. You could always get a call. It comes back to that support mechanism around you. So you survive and you thrive.
Finally, what would you tell clinicians who are considering a move into biotech leadership? Do it or don't do it?
Do it if you're interested in more than the science, because leadership is about letting go. For me to be successful in my career, I've had to let go of some of the oncology and cancer science that I absolutely loved. But you cannot stay in touch, be at the top of your game on that, still see patients, grow an organization. None of us can have it all. And I think for physicians joining the industry, what I would say is, do it if you're interested in developing people, if you love working in teams, if you like the synergy of different thoughts, innovative thinking, if you're adaptable, if you're resilient, all of those things, if the people piece resonates for you, do it, you'll thrive, and you'll have a ball.
Allison, thank you. Sadly for me, this brings us to the end of our conversation. I could continue for a long time. So inspiring. I love the fact that you are not a micromanaging CEO, that you are relentless and always available to your people and live by your strong values. So thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
That wraps up this episode of Clinical Trialblazers. Many thanks to Dr. Allison Jeynes, CEO of Nefro Avillion Clinical Development, for joining us and sharing her insights. Be sure to join us for upcoming episodes of Clinical Trialblazers, where we dive into the people and stories driving innovation across biopharma and biotech. If you enjoyed today's conversation, don't forget to review and rate the podcast on your favorite platform. It really helps others discover the show. Clinical Trialblazers is produced by Parexel Biotech and hosted by me, Alberto Grignolo, with production support from Acast Creative Studios. Thank you for listening. Until next time, stay curious and continue advancing the future of clinical research.